Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. So much to do on our program today. We'll get some concerns as it relates to Georgia injuries. Connor Riley going to help us out with that. One of our own had an unbelievable night last night. I'm talking about the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, who joins us weekly. We'll celebrate that before we're done on today's program. Kirby Smart has made an interesting comparison between a couple of players on his roster, and I think it sort of speaks to kind of what makes Georgia Georgia. We'll talk about that. But off the top of the program here today, Brian Kelly, the LSU coach, has given Georgia a pretty strange compliment. And at first blush, this may seem sort of excessively weird, but if you look a little more closely at it, I think you realize that what Kelly is saying should probably be fully considered. So I want to start with that. It's kind of strange, but almost a fairly, I think, effective conversation starter, if nothing else. So we'll do that right off the top. We are glad to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, before we're done, a good friend of our program, former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, had an unbelievable night last night for the Washington Commanders. Really the talk of the NFL world and kind of the sporting world here this morning is Fromm's performance late last night and what turned into be kind of a thrilling preseason game on Monday Night Football on ESPN. So we'll celebrate the Georgia angle on this before we're done here today. Before that, though, the two teams that met in last year's SEC championship, Georgia and LSU, could possibly be facing off again in a big game here in 2023. And Kelly, who saw Georgia up close and personal in that game last year, Brian Kelly, the LSU coach, and has seen Georgia a couple of times going back to his time as Notre Dame coach, both 2017, 2019, he has been talking about Georgia some here this offseason, and that makes sense. I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. Obviously, if you're Kelly moving into your second year there with the Tigers, you would aspire to be where Georgia is. You want to win a national championship, and yet some of the things that Kelly has said about Georgia as he tries to lead LSU in that direction, I think have been very interesting, including if you want to go back to SEC Media Days in July, Kelly gave you one of the most honest admissions I think a coach can give about, even though last year Georgia and LSU were in the same field together, and Georgia and LSU this year could be a part of the same college football playoff conversation together, when Kelly looks at his own team compared to the Georgia team that beat him up in Atlanta last year, Kelly still sees pretty big divide between these teams here right now. Here is that honest admission from Kelly on that point at SEC Media Days back in July. Take a listen to this.
I know that based upon how we've recruited and how we'll continue to recruit, that we'll have a football roster that will be able to compete against Georgia. Is that right now? No, it's not. But if we continue to do what we're doing, we're going to have a roster that can compete against Georgia, and then it's just a matter of getting it done on the playing field so everybody then can assess they've closed the gap.
No matter who the coach is or what the topic is, I always appreciate honest, candid remarks, and I think from Kelly there, those are honest and candid remarks. He obviously believes himself to be a good coach. He believes that his coaching can make up a talent advantage, perhaps, but when he looks at Georgia, he says he still sees one, and when Kelly said that back in July, kind of got our attention a bit because it's the kind of candor that you don't often hear from a coach at SEC Media Days, which oftentimes is just sort of a bland parade of one boring statement right after the other. But what if I told you that Kelly has now said something even more interesting about Georgia than that? He was spending some time with Chris Lowe. Chris Lowe is a reporter for ESPN.com. And Lowe put this out on Twitter about LSU's own pursuit of a national championship, and Kelly, in talking about that, has given Georgia what I think you can only describe as a fairly strange compliment. But as you listen to this and you kind of listen to it, at first blush, maybe you're like, hey, wait, is he taking a shot at Georgia, taking a jab at Georgia? And honestly, I think upon further reflection, you're going to realize, no, that's not what he's doing. He's actually opening the door for what I think is probably a pretty interesting conversation. Let me show you this on the screen for those of you watching on video, and obviously you're not. I'll read it to you. Chris Lowe on Twitter says that he was visiting with LSU coach Brian Kelly, And Lowe writes on Twitter, or I guess it's now called X, it's obvious that he likes the talent of his LSU team, but do the Tigers have the traits it takes to win a national championship? And here's the quote from Brian Kelly. He says, you got to have some incredible grit. You got to go to Columbia, Missouri like Georgia did last year and play like, he uses an expletive, I'll say garbage, play like garbage, and then still find a way to win. Now, if you wanted to be like super, I guess, unfair here, you could make the headline be, Brian Kelly talks about Georgia playing like garbage, although he uses a different word, at Missouri. And that's kind of the first place your eyes go to, your mind kind of goes to. But what Kelly's actually saying there is, hey, Georgia in a game in which it was not playing well, found a way to show some grit, pulled that out, and ultimately national championships are built on the back of those types of performances. And it's kind of a strange thing for Kelly to say. There's a extreme level of candor there with that. But I also think in a roundabout way, he's kind of right. That when you look at what Georgia did a year ago, among the more significant moments of the season, certainly more significant than the national championship game itself, Georgia won the national championship game 65-7. But its real test came in a sleepy night in, Columbia, Missouri, where I got to tell you, as a Georgia fan myself, there came a moment during that game when I completely recalibrated expectations. And for a moment there, I kind of was left to wonder, is Georgia going to lose? I mean, I got very nervous about that, and yet Georgia still found a way to pull that out. So what Kelly says about Georgia, we'll find out kind of how his own team potentially embraces that as the season goes along. But since Kelly brought it up, I think we should consider it again that the same thing is likely to be true for Georgia at some point in time this year too. The kind of grit that it showed last year, it's going to probably need to show that grit or a similar level of grit and toughness, mental, physical, everything else, in some sort of game that we least expect. And I want to kind of give you some numbers here that bolster this point for a moment. Now, I realize the sort of like fancy stat analytic stuff is not everyone's cup of tea. Totally understand that. And here's what I'd say. What I'm about to read to you, you may not even necessarily believe. You're like, well, how does ESPN know this? Or how did these math nerds come up with this? Even if we would say, I'm not sure this is specifically true, can we at least agree that what I'm about to read is probably directionally true? That it's probably kind of going in the direction of what the actual truth is? That if you look at what the ESPN calls its football power index for the upcoming season, Georgia, as we've talked about before, is third in its preseason FPI. But more importantly than that, when you look at the percentages, the projections that ESPN gives Georgia and the percentages this could happen, that if you look at Georgia's chances of winning all of its games here this season, according to ESPN, Georgia's got a 21.5% chance of winning all its games this year. Conversely, it's got an 18.5% chance of winning the national championship. Now, consider this for a moment. What ESPN in a roundabout way is saying is that Georgia's chances of going undefeated, even though it's playing what most people would say on paper, pretty soft schedule, certainly Georgia will be a massive favorite in almost every one of those games, that Georgia's chances of going undefeated are very, very close numerically to its chances of winning the national championship as well. And a lot of folks may be of the belief, well, Georgia's going to coast right through this regular season schedule, and then we'll find out what happens after that. But mathematically, what ESPN's saying is kind of the opposite, that if Georgia can get towards the end of the season still alive for the national championship, its chances of winning that actually go up greatly. In fact, for those of you who want to pay attention to some of these numeric things as the season rolls along, watch how Georgia's chances of winning the national championship start to go up the more the season passes without Georgia losing. That what we should consider from some of this math stuff is, if Georgia somehow doesn't win the national championship, something that ESPN says is numerically likely to happen, the number one reason why that's the case is not because an Ohio State gets Georgia the way they almost did this past season. I think it's far more likely that somebody along the regular season schedule, a la a Missouri, gets them, and somehow that prevents Georgia from making the college football playoff. Now, I've told you before, that's not what I believe is going to happen. I believe that Georgia's going to win the national championship, or as we say around here, go for 3-23. But Brian Kelly's words remind us that running through a schedule, even a schedule that looks easy on paper, is not an easy thing to do. Right now, ESPN only gives Georgia a 21.5% chance of winning all of its games. Far more likely to lose one at some point in time. Which one's that going to be? We don't necessarily know. It could be any. Obviously, Missouri would have been one of the last games you would have expected a year ago. But that's what you have to be on guard for. So I think the key takeaway here from what Kelly says and what we have waiting for Georgia for the upcoming season is the simple truth that winning a national championship is hard, even if you are by far and away on paper the best team. And predicting the thing that stands in your way is also really difficult too. Perhaps it's an SEC championship game against a team such as LSU or perhaps Alabama. Maybe it's a college football playoff game against one of these Big Ten teams that we're told is essentially unbeatable. Or maybe it's something in the regular season that you never would have seen coming that has a way of sneaking up for you. But if you're a Georgia fan, you got to be on guard for anything. And if you're a Georgia coach or player, you especially have to be on guard for the idea that your grit and your toughness is going to be tested. It was a year ago, and Georgia passed that test. And it's going to be interesting to see here in 2023 how they do all of that again. Now, let me shift gears and talk about something else here just for a moment. If you want to go to Saturday, one of the things that Kirby Smart, I think, said that was really interesting, and some of this was kind of how the question to him was framed, but he was looking at his slot wide receivers. And he makes a very interesting comparison here between two players who could not, at least at first blush, be more different. Mekhi Mews, you remember him as one of the stars of spring, and we kind of saw that validated on G-Day. Apparently, a lot of that for him has continued here through the summer there as well. We're led to believe that Mews is going to be a part of what Georgia does on the field here this year. Perhaps as a part of the offense, almost certainly as a part of the special teams, but Mews is a real player in high standing, and that's a guy that gives Georgia a very capable ball player. It can add to its list of players that it feels comfortable playing. That's what Mews seems to be here right now. And alongside a guy like Mekhi Mews, there's also Dominic Lovett, whose profile is much greater than what Mews would appear to be. Lovett was one of the top 5 transfer players this past season. He comes to Georgia with some real accolades. He had almost 900 yards receiving for Missouri a year ago. He was Missouri's leading receiver, one of the top pass catchers in the entire SEC for 2022. So at first blush, Lovett, his profile, Mews, his profile, seem like they would be really very different. But it's interesting to hear Kirby Smart talk about the ways in which both these guys are actually maybe more alike than you might realize. And to hear them mention the same sentence, I think also kind of explains one of the things that makes Georgia pretty cool right now. Let me let you hear Kirby Smart on that topic for a moment.
They're more similar than they are different. So they both have redeeming qualities and quickness in getting the ball, making touches. They're not physically imposing blockers. They both are willing blockers, and they're both really tough. They'll stick their face in there, and you're not going to be in our program or rep at our practices if you're not willing to go block somebody or play on the special teams. So both those guys have bought into the special teams and the blocking when they don't have the ball. When they do have the ball, they've made some good plays. So we have to find a way to utilize each of their skill sets, and they complement each other in terms of keeping each other fresh. The other guy's Anthony Evans, who's played in the slot, and he's different than those guys, and he's made some plays. So I'm very pleased with where they are. We've got to continue to get more out of those guys.
I want to make 2 quick points about this, then we'll move on. Here's point number 1. We talked the other day, when you look at the way in which the NIL world and the transfer portal world have kind of evolved the way that teams put their rosters together, I think teams like Georgia, who have a history of hoarding the most talent, are going to probably be required to be pretty creative in the future about how they maintain the talent edge they have had. Big splash, NIL type moves, things like that have just created the potential that one team can kind of reach up and grab one individual player away from a program like Georgia. And that can be a little bit frustrating for UGA fans. We've kind of seen that perhaps the KJ Bolden a few weeks ago, perhaps with Williams-Nwaneri just last week, where a big NIL move on the part of one team took away from Georgia the kind of player that maybe in the past they would have won with. It doesn't mean that Georgia's recruiting machine is broken or even slowing down. It's still the best there is, but it does speak to the additional creativity that's required to get the most out of your roster, which means sometimes you go out and make the big splash move yourself, bring in a guy like Lovett or some elite recruit, or sometimes you do what Georgia seems to do better than anybody else, which is you go out and find the diamonds in the rough from the walk-on ranks, the unheralded recruit ranks, whatever else, and get more out of those players than almost any other program saw possible. Mekhi Mews may be the latest example of that. And to hear Kirby Smart, in the scope of a couple of sentences here, mention Mews right there alongside Dominic Lovett, I think is an example of what makes Georgia Georgia. That at Georgia on the playing field, everyone's the same. It's simply a matter of who can perform better here. I don't care what your star ranking was coming out of high school. I don't care how highly you were ranked on these, subscription websites and their transfer portal rankings, things like that. It's about how you perform at Georgia. Mekhi Mews came from nowhere, but he's performing right now as someone who would have had far larger profile coming to the program. Georgia's going to give you a chance to show what you're all about. Mekhi Mews is making good of that opportunity. With that opportunity, I think he deserves credit for that. And then on Lovett, I'll say this. I'm led to believe, based on people who got a chance to see some of these scrimmages and people who, as I sometimes say, know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, you're led to believe that the Dominic Lovett stuff is real right now, that Georgia really truly might have a wide receiver weapon in Lovett that's a little bit different than perhaps what this program has had in the past. I think that's really fun. And when Kirby Smart says those nice things about Lovett there, even though he doesn't probably bend over backwards to kind of, throw compliments in his direction, he still acknowledges some real positivity around Lovett right now. There are others who are willing to take it even further. I saw where Matt Miller, who's a draft analyst now working for ESPN, the other day, he had Lovett ranked among his highest potential risers in the upcoming NFL draft based on the way that he played here this season. I want to read you a couple of sentences. This is not a graphic on the screen. I'm just going to read it from ESPN.com. When it comes to Lovett, Miller at ESPN says, I see potential to round out his game and truly improve under Mike Bobo and the Georgia staff. Listen to this. Miller goes on to say, he's one of the biggest potential risers at wide receiver in this draft class. And if he hits the ground running, Lovett could quickly shoot into the top 50 conversation. That's the kind of transfer player that Georgia has added with Dominic Lovett, the kind of player who could at least be a second-round pick and have a chance to be taken in the top round, the first round of the NFL draft. Georgia hasn't always had a lot of those kinds of wide receivers, but it went out and got Lovett in the transfer portal. That was the kind of player it was bringing into this program. And not only that, Kirby Smart says another walk-on that 99% of the folks in the country have never heard of, he is performing in a similar manner in practice here right now. This is why so many Georgia fans and people who've observed the Georgia program are so high on the Georgia receiver situation right now. There were very good players who could have made other decisions, such as Ladd McConkey, to go to the NFL draft. They stayed at UGA. And in addition to that, Georgia went out and brought in Lovett and also Ra Thomas, the best two wide receiver transfer additions this program has had. There are young receivers seemingly ready to step up. There is a lot of depth at that receiver position here right now. And when you look at what could make Georgia fun and exciting here on the field in the upcoming season, the wide receiver spot seems like a pretty good place to start. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We're happy to have you with us across all platforms. Start 9:45, 1st and 15 on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app, then everywhere live at 10 a.m. on video, podcast and radio after that. Whichever platform you like, we're just glad you find us, glad you use it, and we are really, really happy to have you as a part of our program today. And a big, huge thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia who make it all possible. Foundation, waterproofing issues. If you're a homeowner, you either are or should be on the lookout for this at all times. When it rains, does water end up where it's not supposed to be? In your garage, your basement, your crawl space even? If it does, if that's the case, then Engineered Solutions of Georgia is a company that you need to know about. How about those cracks? Sometimes you see outside of your house those kind of stair-step cracks in the brick. Not a good sign. A horizontal crack in the sheetrock on the inside of the house, once again, potentially not a good sign. But when you have a problem like that, Engineered Solutions of Georgia, the company to know, because they are a solutions-based company. What that means is the entire business plan for ESOG, the entire reason for existing in their minds is to solve problems for customers and clients just like you. They're also proud partners of UGA, makes them fun to do business with because they support the Dogs, longtime friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily. The nicest thing you could ever do for me is to show support for a company like Engineered Solutions of Georgia that's shown great support to us. I truly, truly, genuinely, sincerely, and deeply appreciate that. And I know they're going to do right by you there as well because they have an entire team of engineers on staff to help you with your foundation and waterproofing issues. There's nobody else in our market area that can put that level of resource to work for you solving your problems than our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia can. They've also got a fully transferable triple protection warranty on materials, installation, and design. So great value when it comes to doing business with ESOG there as well. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to give them a call. Engineered Solutions of Georgia, you can call them 678-ESOG now. That's right, dial 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Proud partners of UGA, longtime friends of ours on DawgNation Daily, and a great solution to your foundation and your waterproofing issues. We're going to talk to Connor Raleigh here in a moment. I'm excited about that. Connor, obviously in Athens on Saturday, in the aftermath of the UGA scrimmage, the announcement of Carson Beck as the Georgia starting quarterback. And one of the things in particular that we're going to get into when Connor is on is that issue as it relates to Beck and the very interesting contrast that currently exists between Georgia and some of its top rivals for the national championship, such as Alabama and Ohio State. Very different chatter about the quarterback position coming out of those two places. We told you about this yesterday, and we'll kind of further that conversation today with Connor Raleigh here coming up in just a moment. Looking forward to doing that. We'll also talk, Connor, about the injury situation around Georgia there, too. In fact, why don't we pick up on that before Connor comes on as we go around the DawgHouse here for a moment, and we'll give you a little bit of an update from Kirby Smart on the Georgia injury situation, starting with one of those that we kind of heard about the other day, and this is sort of like that worst kind of news story that kind of pops up. No matter, you're following the NFL, you're following college football, you're following whatever else, that camp season, you're always holding your breath for the injury. Well, last week, Georgia got a little bit of bad injury news, setback anyway, as it relates to the freshman tight end Lawson Lucky. Lucky was another one of those guys, generated great buzz during spring practice. But the start to that freshman season probably going to be delayed here a little bit, or at least the lead-up, the build-up to the start of that season going to be delayed a little bit because of the injury situation that he's currently dealing with. But how serious is it? Kirby Smart said on Saturday that for now they're not quite so sure. This is what Kirby said about the Lawson Lucky injury situation.
They're all day to day. I don't know really what to tell you. Smile's running really fast.
Do we have Lucky?
It's week to week. I mean, I won't know exactly what it is. We've had Arian came back in 3 to 4 weeks from a similar injury, but we've had guys take 5 weeks. We've had guys take 6 weeks. So I can't tell you that. I don't know. It'll be how he handles it and the pain tolerance and the recovery. But Ron and the medical staff are going to do the best job they can to get him back.
So Kirby, not a lot of details there, and I kind of take that to be not some sort of attempt to conceal, but just sort of the general belief they're not quite so sure, because it seems like there's kind of a wide range on some of that kind of stuff. But at the very least, some of the expectations that existed for Lucky probably have to be tempered just a little bit, just given the kind of unknown situation and perhaps how long that's going to linger. We obviously wish him well during his recovery. We still believe that Georgia can be very strong at the tight end position, but Lucky's a guy that people are excited about. And at some point this season, we believe we'll get a chance to see why that is, but we may be forced to wait on that a little bit. How about some other Georgia injuries for a moment? Interesting update on Kendall Milton, admittedly not the world's best news. Also factor Janelle Aguero into this particular conversation there as well. Kirby kind of covering some other injuries, the Branson Robinson thing there too. Here's Kirby on some other injury situations for Georgia, and in some respects sounding a little bit like he had kind of sounded when he was talking about Lawson Lucky. Once again, Kirby Smart from Saturday.
They're all day to day. I don't know really what to tell you. Smile's running really fast. He's exercising. He is not practicing. He will be able to do some drill work Monday. He's come along really well. He's very, very passionate about getting back, and he's not sore. He's running, and the first test of that foot is how much soreness comes when he runs, and he's been great. Kendall has been hitting higher speeds. He was not able to go today. I think he's really close, but he's been out for a while. Jonell's got a hamstring, grade 1, so I don't know when he'll be back. And there was one other one.
Branson?
Yeah, Branson's been doing more each day in practice. I mean, he basically scrimmaged today without carrying the ball. He was in on plays, did pass pro, ran routes, caught balls. I mean, he looks pretty good out there, but we have not tackled him live.
So there you go. I take that as pretty good news on Smile Mon, and that's a player I believe that can really be, before the year's done, obviously one of Georgia's most important players. He was a year ago. When he comes back fully healthy, we believe that'll be the case. Admittedly, not the best news about Kendall Milton, the fact that he wasn't a participant Saturday, according to what Kirby Smart said there, as that hamstring issue apparently lingers for him. The longer it goes, the more of a concern it obviously turns out to be. I think the Janelle Aguero thing is probably worth paying attention to. I do believe Aguero, along obviously with Tyke Smith, who's expected, I think, to start at the star position. Aguero could be an example of one of those freshmen that finds his way onto the field if he's healthy enough to do so. Kirby says it's a grade 1 hamstring. The honest truth is, not being a medical professional, I don't know, is that good or bad? In a criminal court, murder 1's the worst kind of murder. Is grade 1 hamstring the worst or the best? I don't know. We'll have to find out more about that, I guess. And then Branson Robinson, actually a little bit more hopeful on Branson, which you kind of like to hear there too. So, Georgia, I would say, is certainly more healthy than not. But there are obviously a handful of expected key contributors who are kind of dealing with some of that stuff. Ernest Green, I guess, left the scrimmage briefly on Saturday, but according to Kirby, also kind of came back in too. So you're kind of watching all of that. It seems like Georgia's not in a terrible place from an injury standpoint, but there are some decent names who are, kind of dealing with some stuff right now. So at least worth our attention there a little bit. And we'll make that around the DawgHouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia Today. And as we get ready to bring on Connor Riley to talk more about this, let me remind you that if you go to DawgNation.com, at the top of the page right now, one of the things you'll see is a really fun season predictions contest that we're doing. So it's really easy to just kind of click into it, and you can make your predictions, and you can have a chance to be a winner of some of the fun stuff that we're doing here right now. We've already had a lot of folks kind of get on board to enter this. You've got between now, really, it's been going on for a little while, but between now and September 1st to kind of get in on this. So basically right up until the end of next week, you're going to get involved in this. So you got big thoughts how these Dogs players are going to perform here this year. Your season predictions can be made online at DawgNation.com, and they could make you a winner there as well. So please find out more about this by just simply going to DawgNation.com. Right there at the top of the page, you can see it, you can click in, and you can be a part of that today. Okay, before we are done, one of our guys, Jake Fromm, is the absolute talk of the NFL world here this morning. We will tell you why, what went on, and what turned out to be, and the list of contenders of this is not very long, one of the most thrilling preseason games I've seen in quite some time. So this was last night. Jake Fromm played a big role in all of that. We will celebrate some good news for him on that before we're done. But for now, Georgia injuries, the very interesting comparison at quarterback for Georgia and the other teams that think they can win the national championship. We'll cover that and so much more with Connor Riley today here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Glad to have Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia Today. And Connor, we heard Kirby Smart a moment ago sharing some injury information based on a question you asked him. So I'm going to turn the tables on you and now ask you a question. When you look at the overall kind of totality of the Georgia injuries, fairly significant at running back, seemingly not that saturated maybe anywhere else. How serious do you put the Georgia injury situation right now? Is it cumulative enough to kind of rise the level of being a concern, or do you think of Georgia as mostly being a healthy team moving into the start of kind of the post-fall camp situation, kind of getting into the sort of actual in-season preparations? Where do you put the level of Georgia's health here at the moment?
Yeah, I think when you remove the running back position, it was probably a pretty good fall camp in terms of injuries, or at least in terms of high-end guys. In the years past, we've seen guys like Darnell Washington, Tyke Smith, expected contributors to go down, and they were really lost for that first month of the season last year. Arian Smith, I think, was poised to play a big role, and it took him a long time to come back from his ankle injury. You look at the guys right now that are injured, and we'll talk about the running back position, I'm sure, later, or people are just tired of hearing me talk about it. But, Schmaumann is probably not going to be ready to go for the start of the season. That was expected for a while. Lawson Lucky's probably going to miss maybe about a month, might be ready to go by that Auburn game there. Raylan Wilson's dealing with a hyperextended knee, and those two guys are both freshmen who, maybe they see the field in terms of special teams, but they weren't going to play a ton. And then really the one to monitor right now, I think it's Kamari Lassiter, a foot injury that has sort of lingered maybe a little bit longer than some people had thought. He might be 100% for the season opener. They also might, choose to, I think, be safe with him and also get reps for guys like Nyland Green, Julian Humphrey, Dalen Everett, as they still try and figure out that cornerback position. So, all in all, I think when you remove the running back position, it is a pretty good, bill of health, so to speak, with Georgia coming out of fall camp.
I mean, the other one that I would also talk about a little bit, too, is Janelle Aguirre, and I kind of joked a moment ago about not really knowing if a grade 1 hamstring, is that the good one or the bad one? Like when I have to fill out those surveys, you have to circle 1 if you strongly agree, or circle 5 if you strongly disagree. I never kind of remember which one's supposed to be which. So, I mean, on a serious note, I do believe by the end of the year, Aguero, I would almost expect to be Georgia's starter at that nickelback star position. How much do you think injuries could kind of slow that progression for him?
Certainly a good bit, just because, again, that hamstring injury, we don't know how serious it is right now. Again, Kirby said grade 1, held him out of the scrimmage on Saturday, and so I think that's certainly something to monitor. Look, Tyke Smith was going to be your starting star player, star nickelback to start the season, but you look at those first couple games, UT Martin, Ball State, and then that fourth game, UAB, those were going to be chances for Aguero to get a lot of reps. And if that hamstring isn't healthy, then you lose the chance and opportunity at those reps, and you're having to take a chance on a guy who, albeit extremely talented and an unreal athlete, you're going to have to get him those reps in bigger game situations. Kentucky at home, Auburn on the road, Jacksonville against Florida. And so I think you want to be careful there in terms of getting him up to speed, but also making sure he's 100%. Because if he's not, as you know, with hamstrings, those things can just linger for a while and really never heal. And so I think that is certainly something to monitor for a guy that Georgia had very high expectations for. And
then very quickly, it was kind of eye-opening to me to hear Kirby say that Kendall didn't participate on Saturday. I'm not a medical guy. I don't know what that means, and I still believe that Kendall can be a big part of this Georgia rushing attack here this year. But, gosh, we're getting towards the end of August here, and that kind of hasn't cleared itself up yet for him. I know he's personally frustrated about that, but a little, alarming. I noticed it. Let me just say it it's not alarming because that's too strong of a word. I definitely noticed it when Kirby said that Kendall didn't really participate on Saturday.
Yeah, I think they know what they have in Kendall. They know what they can get from him. And just the biggest thing, and this is maybe, the staff admitting it, they just need him to stay healthy. They don't need him to try and push through a hamstring injury when he's not 100%. And Kirby did say he's pretty close to hitting his normal top speeds. But, for such a talented player, the story going into the season, and it's probably going to follow him throughout the year, is just how much can Georgia expect Kendall Milton to stay healthy. And what we said about the hamstring injury with Janelle Aguero, it applies to Kendall Milton. He had one in the spring, and then he has another one right at the start of fall camp there. And look, it's not like, Kendall isn't taking care of his body. He's doing everything he can, both inside the facility and outside of it. I think some guys are just cursed with injury luck. There's some guys that are predisposed to getting hurt. There are some guys that just find a way to never really get hurt. And unfortunately for Kendall, a really talented player, a guy who, whether he's on the field or not, is going to be a key voice in this locker room for Georgia, but he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. I expect him to be able to play in that first game against UT Martin, but how much we see of him, I don't know, just given, Georgia needs Kendall to be a game 13, game 14, game 15 player. And they don't really need to put a lot of tread on his tires, to start the season, especially when he is coming in banged up.
I'm fascinated by Kirby Smart's instincts sometimes because I don't believe he planned the Beck thing to work out the way that it did. I really don't, naming Carson Beck as the starter. But my gosh, you want to talk about just sort of a flair for instinct here? Georgia makes a very clear, decisive announcement, Beck's our guy. At the same time this weekend, you've got Alabama just sort of fumbling around in the dark. Now they're talking about their fourth-string quarterback, Dylan Lonergan. They have no idea who their starting quarterback is going to be. Conversely, Ohio State, which always has a great quarterback, Devin McCourt's supposed to be that guy here this year. It sounds like coming out of Columbus, there is a very real chance that he just ain't it. Now, maybe eventually he does, but for now, the younger guy, the brown kid, sounds like he's going to have a chance to be that guy for them. Instead, there is honest, I think, mystery about who the Ohio State starting quarterback is going to be there as well. And, Connor, it is hard not to draw that contrast. Georgia sure what it has in Carson Beck, at least in its own mind. Alabama completely unsure. Ohio State surprisingly unsure. I don't think Kirby Smart planned it to work out that way, but from a PR standpoint, I don't believe it could have worked out better for Georgia. Do you agree?
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. I'll say this about the Ohio State conversation. Ever since Ryan Day has become the head coach, each one of his starting quarterbacks has been a Heisman Trophy finalist. And so I'm willing to give whoever wins that job the benefit of the doubt because he's going to be surrounded with a great group of wide receivers and two really talented running backs when healthy, and Travion Henderson and Myron Williams there. So that's not the same level of concern. And As far as Alabama, look, these guys, with the exception of Buckner, had all springs to try and win and stake a claim to this job in the way I think Carson Beck really came out and did. And Milrose even got more experience in terms of starts than Carson Beck does. And for whatever reason, be it a new offense, be it the new, offensive coordinator, I think Alabama trying to change what it does, as I don't think this is a particularly strong group of wide receivers, certainly compared to what they've had in the past, and they want to become more of a run-first offense there. The quarterback position has sort of emerged as a quagmire there. And look, Bryce Young was, as good as any player in the country last year. If you wanted to say he was the best player in the country, I would not fault you in the slightest for that in terms of what he did, in terms of what he meant for that offense. And so to go from, the best player in the country to average at best right now, it looks like what you have at that quarterback position, it should be a little worrying if you're Alabama there. And so with Georgia, look, Kirby Smart's never really built the offense around the quarterback being the best or the most important player. And I don't think he's ever going to do that. And while, yes, Carson Beck is probably going to play a bigger role this year just because of the injury situation at running back. Again, you've got maybe the best offensive line in the country. I certainly believe that. I know people in Michigan would disagree with that. You've got Brock Bowers, maybe the best pass catcher in the country, certainly the best tight end. You've got a really strong group of wide receivers around him. I think Kirby made the call because I think he sort of recognized, every player is different, and some guys getting that vote of confidence, getting that belief, I think helps guys sometimes more than others. And I think you saw that in the spring game when they let Carson go out there and be the first-team quarterback and run the first-team offense in a way that I think is tailored to his skill set. I think that's a big reason why he came out and probably had his best practice of the spring that day. And that confidence does something for a guy like him, especially when, look, going back to 2021, and he's owned up to this, that situation where, he was QB2, JT Daniels goes down and he has a chance to step in as a starter, and he handled it poorly. Did not practice well that week. They rode with Stetson Bennett. Maybe they were always going to ride with Stetson because he was a veteran hand and it was UAB. But I think that experience really helped Carson, and I think it gave Kirby Smart some sort of idea in terms of what they're looking for from Carson and how to get the best out of him. And I think it just so happened to work out that what's best for Carson comes at a time when two other big powers, certainly I think the four teams that can really challenge Georgia this year are sort of trying to find their own ways to empower their own quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying about Ohio State. I mean, obviously, I expect them to have a good quarterback no matter what his name ends up being, and maybe you could say the same thing about Alabama there as well. I guess what I find interesting on the Georgia part of this, I'm a believer that if you can name a starting quarterback, there is value in doing so. I think that's true for two reasons. At some point in time, the competition has to end. The preparation has to begin. That's what Georgia wants to do with Beck right now. I think that's really good. But it also provides a focal point for the rest of the team to rally around. And so if I'm a Georgia fan, when I see my team announcing a quarterback here this weekend, no matter what the end result ends up being for the guys that start for these teams, those other programs have been more quarterback dependent. Maybe they still have better years. But it makes my operation right now look very buttoned up. My team knows enough about who his quarterback is going to be. They feel comfortable making that announcement. They're going to prepare him to play. The team's going to rally around him. This is the acknowledged leader of this offense here right now. And for me, for the moment, that does give Georgia a little bit of an edge in comparison to these other teams who think they can win national championships, such as Alabama or Ohio State.
Yeah, again, I think it instills confidence not just in Carson, but in the fan base to believe in Carson, because I do think Kirby learned from this. I don't think he ever really empowered Stetson, probably until the college football playoff against Michigan, in terms of believing in him, in terms of really sticking for him and standing up for him. And then you look at that performance against Michigan. He comes out and plays, to that point, the best game of his career. And so I think there is something to be said from a coaching standpoint of choosing to empower your players and signaling that to the fan base, because the fan base certainly takes note of that. There is, going into his first career start, a lot more support behind Carson Beck and what he ultimately might be, I think, than there really was for Stetson probably up until that Tennessee game last year. And so I think Kirby Smart recognizes the value in that, and as he becomes a more experienced head coach, these are sort of the things you learn over the course of time there. He always believed in Jake Fromm. Jake Fromm was always his guy, and so he never really had to do that early in his time at Georgia. And I think, the entire Stetson Bennett saga from 2020 on, I think was a real learning experience for Kirby Smart in terms of how to better handle the position, and I think you've seen that this offseason. Quick change of subject here, BA. This happened, I think, after you came on the air, and you may have talked about it already, but Juju Lewis, number 1 overall quarterback in the 2026 cycle, has committed to USC. So that is one.
Has he really? No, thank you.
He's officially committed to USC.
Not aware of that. How about that? An early sophomore commitment for Lewis. Obviously, there was a big battle of quarterbacks this past weekend between Carrollton and Hughes. One of Lewis's top high school teammates also suffered a pretty serious injury, I believe, this weekend there as well. I guess I'm a little bit surprised by the early commitment there on that. That must have been quite a negotiation to get him to commit there as a sophomore. I do think he's really good. I don't think the buzz around him has even started to build to the degree that it possibly will. Jeff kind of told us on Friday that obviously Georgia was perhaps not the world's biggest factor in that recruitment here right now. But what about USC securing this as a sophomore? I guess I'm surprised by the timing of this. Are you?
I had heard rumblings that he was getting tired of the recruiting process. I don't think he spoke to reporters after Friday night's game, which, again, you lose in that manner, losing at the 1-yard line. An incredible high school game. I know you were busy working, but I got a chance to watch some of that, and that was a lot of fun. You rarely see high school games to start the season go that well. And so, with Lewis, look, there are going to be other talented quarterbacks out there, and this is sort of a nice way to maybe tie the bow in our larger conversation. Again, Carson Beck, over the course of his recruitment, he started as a top 50 prospect, committed to Alabama at one point, and you just sort of see the way this evolves. He eventually doesn't finish as a ranked quarterback prospect in some of the recruiting services out there, and you look at guys like Jalen Milroe was a top 100 player, Kyle McCord was a 5-star prospect in the 2021 cycle. Development is different for every guy out there, and while Juju Lewis is a fantastic talent and a guy that is every bit worthy of being number 1 overall sophomore in the country, as far as the quarterback position, look, this is a position that changes a lot, and there are a lot of ups and downs. I think Stetson Bennett embodied that better than anyone. And so, for Lewis to make this commitment this early, I get it. He's a guy who probably grew tired of the recruiting process because when you're that hyped that early, it can just be a lot. And I think by picking USC now, a school that I think you and I both probably always thought was going to be a factor there for him, given what Lincoln Riley has been able to get out of his quarterback, specifically quarterbacks of his sort of size and stature, smaller type players. You look at, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, even Caleb Williams to a certain degree, though Williams is a good bit bigger than Lewis. And so I think from a fit standpoint, you certainly get that. And then obviously, NIL has played a part in Lewis's discussions and what that means there. And USC figures to be very attractive when it comes to that.
Very quickly, and perhaps I should know this, I guess I don't. How much reclassification chatter exists around Lewis? I at one point in time kind of heard it kind of thrown out there as maybe a possibility, but that's also the kind of thing that sometimes people throw out without, I haven't seen his high school transcript. In other words, I don't really know how possible that necessarily is. Is there any kind of chatter about a reclassification for Lewis at the moment?
I haven't heard a ton, but in making this commitment this early, I do think it's maybe possible to start pushing for that, to where if he does everything, maybe he can get to campus by, say, summer 2025, if he accelerates everything and moves things around, because that's maybe the benefit of this commitment this early in terms of maybe getting to campus earlier, because Georgia does have, in some regards, restrictive NIL rules in terms of what high school players can make. And, maybe that starts to change here. I believe there's a meeting in October to discuss on that. But, right now we haven't heard a ton of chatter when it comes to Lewis in terms of reclassifying. But him making this commitment and this decision this early maybe opens the door for that and allows him to start accelerating that process. Let
me squeeze in one more quick topic before we let you go. We talked about off the top of the program what I thought was a very interesting quote from Brian Kelly. It's the kind of thing that kind of goes viral because, Kelly used a bad word. People seem to love that. And, talked about Georgia and, the grit that it showed to beat Missouri in kind of a challenging situation. And yet I do believe once you kind of get over the candor that Kelly uses, it's more interesting than what a lot of coaches typically say. I think there's actually some real truth to Kelly's words here. We talked about some of the FPI data a moment ago. That if you look at Georgia's chances of winning the national championship and its chances of going undefeated, they're almost the exact same odds. And I think most Georgia fans would say it's far more likely that if Georgia doesn't win the national championship, it loses in the playoff or it loses the national championship game or something along those lines. But I think numerically, when you look at the 12-game slate it's about to play, even though it's individually going to be a sizable favor in all of those games, the chances of winning all of those games actually probably isn't as high as some Georgia fans think that it is. I think Kelly's word should be taken pretty serious here. In other words, on the part of UGA fans, it does take a lot of grit to win a national championship, and at some point in time, you do just sort of have to gut it out in a game in which you don't have your best, and that's probably still going to be true for Georgia here in 2023 as well.
All right, I think you can look at the Missouri game last year as a perfect example for Georgia in that. And it's one of those things, from a 10,000-foot view, as I think you and Brian Kelly have laid out, it's just really hard to go undefeated and win all your games. And while certainly when you get up close to game week and you know, all right, Georgia's got a talent edge, in some instances they've got a decisive schematic advantage there as well. And so maybe when you get down to the granular level of, all right, yeah, Georgia can go 1-0 12 different times during the regular season, and then they got to go win the SEC championship game. Certainly that becomes more difficult. And Kirby Smart owned up to this, I think, at times last season, and certainly in this offseason. Like, you need bounces to go your way if you're going to win a national championship. Georgia got those in 2021 and 2022. I think you and I probably agree. They didn't get them in 2017 and 2018, and that's sort of the difference between Georgia having 2 national championships and potentially 4. Now, I'll say 2 national championships probably certainly seems like the right number of national championships to have for Kirby Smart right now. But it's just one of those things. You need luck in football sometimes. You can be the most talented team in the world, but it's just impossible to play an A game 15 times over the course of the season, especially when you're dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds. And so, even looking at the NFL level, like the Chiefs lose 3, 4, 5 games a year and struggle sometimes to win. And so it's just sort of hard to always be at your best, and I think that's what makes the 2022 team so impressive. They found a way to go 15-0 in a way that, sure, like that 2021 team may have been more talented, but they couldn't do that. And so, I think it speaks to the ability for a team to be resilient, to have that level of resolve, to dig deep when you're not playing your best and grind out a win. Thinking back to that Missouri game in particular, Georgia's offensive line was getting their tail whipped for 3 quarters in that game at the defensive line, and then something flipped at the start of the fourth quarter. Georgia started to turn the game around right then and there when the offensive line started playing better. And so those are the sort of things that you need to go your way and the breaks that you need to have if you're going to go 15-0 and ultimately win another national championship.
Connor, fun to hear you on the show today. Great to read you there at DawgNation.com. Appreciate your time. Look forward to having you back here on the program. And thanks for making us aware of the Julian Lewis news, something that we had not realized while we were busy doing the show. So I appreciate you sharing that, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So there you go, Lewis off the board for the class of 2026. I don't know that many Georgia fans viewed him being at UGA as a huge possibility, but I guess now it's kind of officially over there as well. I do think he's going to be kind of in that Trevor Lawrence category of a guy who, by the time he gets to be a senior, which is if he stays for the rest of his career, is 2 more years from now, I just think the level of hype around him is going to be substantial. So this may mean more to you later than perhaps it does here right now, but nonetheless, pretty big news for the class of 2026 here today. We got some recruiting news to give you there as well, involving another SEC team coming up in a moment. But before that, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously, there is so many fun and exciting things happening for Royal Caribbean in 2024. And Jessica Slater is a great travel agent that can tell you all about it. You can call her 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. That's jslater@dreamvacations.com. One of the things you see right there on your screen if you're watching on video is Icon of the Seas. It debuts in January. It's going to be the largest cruise ship ever constructed. It's going to have so many things unlike anything you've ever seen on a cruise vacation before. This is going to be an unparalleled experience. Brand new restaurant concepts, fun new bars and lounges, entertainment options. Unlike anything ever, you want to be on board Icon of the Seas. Jessica Slater can tell you how you can do it. But something else that I'm also pretty excited about there, too, is another ship debut in July of next year. It's called Utopia of the Seas. It's the brand new Oasis-class ship, and it's going to be going out of Port Canaveral on those 3 and those 4-night sailings. Royal Caribbean has really said we're going to dominate the sort of 3 and 4-night sailing space because that's what a lot of families enjoy doing. And Royal Caribbean kind of thinks of itself, and we kind of think of it too because I know my family loves it, as the number 1 family cruise line, number 1 family vacation you can take of almost any stripe, really. And so one of the ways they're doing that is saying, hey, right there in Port Canaveral, where it's convenient for a lot of folks who kind of live Atlanta area, Georgia, places like that, we're going to put a great brand new ship, those 3 and 4 night sailings, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay, enjoying the Bahamas and enjoying the best of all the things that a brand new Oasis class ship can provide. That's July of 2024 there as well. Jessica Slater can tell you all about that, so make sure you check in with her here today. Before we talk more about really a very buzzy night last night for former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm and a friend of our program, let's go cruising around the SEC here for a moment, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And perhaps the biggest bulletin board material we've gotten for Georgia all offseason long comes the way of a former SEC coach, Lou Holtz. I don't know where this was published, but I saw where Lou Holtz is going to put out his top 16 for the upcoming season. He's got Georgia 5th. He's got Michigan number 1, so I guess you can put Holtz in the category of those who like mighty Michigan. And if I knew how to do the Lou Holtz, voice, if I could do the impersonation, I'd do him saying mighty Michigan or whatever it was that he'd be saying. USC coming in at number 2, Alabama at number 3. He has Ohio State at number 4, and then little old Georgia coming in at number 5. Now, in a roundabout way, I'm not even mad about this because I'll confess something. Early 2000s, when Holtz and Mark May, who even knows what he's doing these days, when those two were kind of doing battle against each other on like the old late-night ESPN scoreboard show, I forget what it's even called, but that sort of late-night ESPN show, I used to love that. Like, that to me is like such a great era for like early 2000s college football. So much fun. They're arguing. Who was the one that would dress up like the judge? Like, they had like gimmicks. I know Lou Holtz was even kind of a clown back on that show to a lot of people. I used to love that late-night ESPN show that had Lou Holtz on it because you never knew what dumb thing he was going to say or Mark May was going to say, but you kind of tuned in for it. We didn't have a ton of internet stuff the way we do now, so cable television is about all we had back then, and I was entertained by it. So the fact that Lou Holtz is still somewhere spewing off the absolute worst takes possible in a roundabout way, that's actually kind of comforting for me. So, Coach Lou, thank you for doing what you do there on that. Speaking of Holt's former team, you talk about a seamless transition here, broadcast professional. The South Carolina Gamecocks have added a pretty interesting transfer late to the process here. His name is Drew Tuazama, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He was an edge rusher for UAB a year ago and kind of in that, kind of all-conference conversation a bit. I think he was a second-team all-conference type performer. He's been waiting to graduate. That's why he's just now leaving and just now having announced. Now, I'm not telling you this is big-time headline name or kind of a big, sort of eye-popping piece of news. I'm not saying that. But in football, everything matters. Little things matter. And finding a capable player who can play in your defense, perhaps get after the quarterback a bit for South Carolina late in the process here, this is one of the things that's going to matter too. Now, if you think about, if he's just getting here, they play Georgia in X number of weeks, just a short few weeks. How effective is he by then? Probably not, and South Carolina probably couldn't keep it close with Georgia even if he was. But when you think about other games that South Carolina could play, all of a sudden a guy like this sort of matters. The transfer portal is not very kind to the Gamecocks when it comes to their pass rush. So adding a guy like this from a place like UAB that plays real football, and Tuazama had a pretty good year a year ago, I think for South Carolina this is not a small thing. It could potentially be a decent size thing. Tennessee also got some good recruiting news yesterday. A 5-star edge rusher, at least according to some services, named Jordan Ross, who's from Vestavia Hills, Alabama. He committed to Tennessee. The honest truth is that a lot of the programs that typically pursue 5 stars, you never really heard Ross connected with them very much. You can do with that what you will, I guess. But for Tennessee, this is also one of those things that admittedly kind of matters. Tennessee kind of gets its pick of the litter when it comes to offensive names. Mike Matthews here from Georgia is certainly an example of that for the 2024 class. But they've also just awful defensively, and it's one of the reasons why they weren't a legitimate playoff contender a year ago. They just couldn't stop anybody. And it's one of the reasons why they'll probably stop short of any kind of real substantial success here this year too. We know, though, as long as Josh Heupel's head coach there, they are going to score points. They're going to probably have effective quarterback play and certainly probably good wide receiver play too. But the ongoing question that no one's ever been able to really satisfactorily answer or answer in a satisfactory way, to maybe say it better, is how good of a defense can you play when you play offense that fast? Well, if you're going to have any chance of being successful defensively, you got to have top recruits. And the cupboard for Heupel when he took that job at Tennessee was barren. It was bare on that side of the ball. So to a certain extent, I think Heupel does deserve a lot of credit for what he's done in 2 years, especially in his first year in 2021 when they had no business being as competitive as they were. Even on the defensive side, they actually played, about as good a defense you're going to be able to play when you're, got the, sort of 7-on-7 style offense. They were, not embarrassing defensively in 2021, at least for the most part. But being better defensively requires top recruits. Ross is an example of the kind of guy you got to win with, and Tennessee, to its credit, does do that. Speaking of Tennessee, I saw this from Danny White, the Vols athletic director, and this is interesting because these two teams are going to play each other. So Tony Elliott is the Virginia head coach, former Clemson offensive coordinator, and apparently a couple of times here, Elliott has insinuated or outright stated that he was offered the Tennessee job. So what Danny White, the Vols athletic director, has now said is that the first time this happened, he kind of let it go and let it pass. But once Elliott said it again, he felt a need to response that Tennessee only offered the job to one person. That was Josh Heupel. Look, the oldest trick in the book is what constitutes an actual contract offer. You've heard it said before that there's so many different back channel ways to do all of this that every program only offers one coach the job. Officially speaking, that's the guy they know is going to take it. That no one offers a job unless you know the guy's going to say yeah. So in some respects, what White's doing here is playing the same semantic game that athletic directors and university presidents have been playing for a long time. But on the other side of this, Heupel and White were also very close. They worked together at UCF. So the idea that White would take the Tennessee job and then turn around and hire a coach he'd hired before, that makes all the sense in the world. So did Elliott get the interview and get consideration? I'm guessing he probably did. Was White ever going to seriously consider hiring anybody else but Heupel? I believe Danny White when he says the answer to that question is no. And then finally there's this. Jim Harbaugh and Michigan have self-imposed a 3-game suspension. At one point in time there was talk, and honestly, we probably contributed to some erroneous reporting on this because at one point in time, I think there was this general consensus that the 4-game suspension that Harbaugh was supposed to have gotten from the NCAA had kind of been announced. And I think we actually reported at one point in time that it had been. As you know, a couple of weeks ago, because we did talk about this, the NCAA kind of rescinded all that and basically, said it's actually more serious than that. And apparently Michigan's going to kind of draw a line in the sand now against the NCAA, self-imposing a 3-game suspension, which is actually less than the suspension that was rumored to have been agreed upon between Michigan, Harbaugh, and the NCAA. All of this related to lying to NCAA investigators, I guess. I've said before, I care enough about this that I'd like to know the story behind the story and all this, but I don't care enough to actually read any articles about it. So if anybody wants to sum this up for me in like 2 sentences about what's actually going on here, I'd be curious to hear it. Ultimately, I think that wise programs will just look at the NCAA and refuse to cooperate. And that may be what Michigan, even with all its pretentiousness, that may be what it's doing here in this case of saying, we're not that interested in pretending like you still matter. That may be in a roundabout way what's going on here. And maybe from the NCAA side, the sort of death rattle of, we're going to be very serious about oversight before we completely disappear off the map. That may be the story here. But nonetheless, new information out there about Harbaugh. It will make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, let me give a quick shout out here for a moment, and then I want to talk about Jake Fromm. If you are coming to the Atlanta area at any point in time here for the rest of the year, whether it be high school football, college football, you come to see a Falcons game, whatever you got going on, I want you to keep the area in which we broadcast from every day in your mind. We're here in the Dunwoody area. You've heard me talk before about Discover Dunwoody. Great organization that kind of puts a spotlight on all the really cool things happening here in our Dunwoody area. Because if you're traveling to Atlanta and you need to get Midtown, Buckhead, downtown, whatever else, so convenient to get there from here where we are in Dunwoody because we're kind of nestled right in between 2 MARTA stations, which make getting around Atlanta very easy. But if you want an affordable, family-friendly way to enjoy great shopping, great dining, really wonderful hotel selection. Right here in the Dunwoody area, you got that. 2,100 hotel rooms spread across 9 hotels, more than 200 restaurants, more than 300 shopping opportunities, all in a very safe, family-friendly type area. That is what Dunwoody is all about. So please check out discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. That's discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation and find out why this Dunwoody area where we are located, broadcast from each and every day, is a great location for you when your travels take you to the Atlanta area. DiscoverDunwoody.com/DawgNation. All right. So last night was an incredibly fun night in the NFL. Monday Night Football back on ESPN. Joe Buck, Troy Aikman on the call, and the Washington Commanders beat the Baltimore Ravens. Now, The main headline for all of us is it was a very big night at the end for Commanders quarterback Jake Fromm, our weekly guest here on DawgNation Daily, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. In fact, let me show you the stat line for Fromm here last night, marching towards the victory, 10 of 16 through the air. That's a 62.5% completion percentage, threw for 91 yards and a touchdown. Plus, he also, as someone named Evan Hill reports on Twitter, led the Commanders down the field in a 2-minute drill to win the game on a field goal. So he had a touchdown, but he also led the game-winning kind of field goal drive there as well, throwing the ball around really crisply and sharply. Jake Fromm looked very good, I believe, on his way to being an active member of that Washington Commanders 53-man roster here for this upcoming season. Now, the thing that kind of got the national fans, media, and just sports fans in general in such a like up in arms about all this is the strangest stat in all of sports, I believe. But the Baltimore Ravens coming into last night had a long winning streak in the preseason. And there were some Commanders players, not Jake Fromm, but there were some Commanders players who had talked about the fact they wanted to beat this streak. So you got kind of a rivalry anyway, not division rivals, not even the same conference, but they are in the Beltway area together. A lot of Ravens fans, Commanders fans don't like each other very much. So you got a little bit of a rivalry spice to this preseason game anyway. And then you've got the Ravens, who have this very strange record of having not lost in the preseason in darn near forever. Commanders said they wanted to end it. And so when they did, a lot of people making a big deal about this. I thought this was really funny from Pro Football Focus on Twitter. You have to kind of know the backstory here, but for a long time, The Undertaker had a long winning streak at WrestleMania. And finally it was ended by Brock Lesnar beat The Undertaker at WrestleMania, ending his streak. Well, Pro Football Focus had some fun with that last night, saying the Ravens' preseason streak is now over, showing The Undertaker in the ring, lying flat on the ground. Ravens' head replaces The Undertaker's head, now showing the 24-1 mark for the Ravens during the preseason. So Pro Football Focus calling on pro wrestling to have some fun at the Ravens' expense. I like all of that. And obviously Jake Fromm was right in the middle of it with a pretty big performance. After the game, Jake was kind of talking about what it meant to do that, and he sounded a lot like Jake Fromm talking about a big win last night on national TV for the Washington Commanders. Here's Jake.
For us, we're going in late in the game. It's big for us, and anytime that we have to go out there and play in front of a crowd and put a jersey on, it's a great opportunity for us, and we want to go out and showcase and do our best.
And 24 in a row for the Ravens, 24 preseason wins in a row, no more. Was that something you guys talked about? I mean, I know it's preseason, but it's also something that, obviously was talked about on a national level a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly a really great thing that they had going on. But, I mean, for us, it's not necessarily what we're thinking about going into it. Man, we're just trying to really just execute on some plays. And obviously any game you come into, you want to come out and win, obviously, for sure. And even a preseason game, but, they just happen to be the next opponent. And, man, thank God we got to win.
So, listen, I think that's really awesome from Jake Fromm. Great to see him have such a good performance, and just really cool to see. And I said before, based on my understanding here, I think Jake's got a really good shot to be on that active roster for Washington. He's still going to join us during the year, even as he's playing football. We'll be on the show this week, too. I just think it's a great thing. I'm really happy for him, and it was one of those things. It was kind of fun last night to watch. A preseason game sort of felt like it mattered there for a moment. So that was kind of a cool thing to be able to see there as well. So congratulations to Jake Fromm on a terrific performance. Now, speaking of the National Football League, that's also the subject of our Golden Shoe here today there as well. One of the things you may remember is that Kirby Smart has stated that Georgia's goal this year is to be like the famous rugby team from New Zealand. They're called the All Blacks because they wear all black uniforms, and they've got lots of phrases. That's where the better never rest phrasing comes from. But another phrasing you've heard Georgia use this year is the idea of eating off the floor. Well, the Philadelphia Eagles on Instagram shared a picture of Nolan Smith walking in the other day wearing an Eat Off the Floor t-shirt, which is an awesome way to be reminded that Nolan Smith is still just as much a DGD as he ever was. And a lot of Georgia fans could not love the Philadelphia Eagles much more because of their continued ties there to UGA. So awesome to see. We will give the Eagles and Nolan a golden shoe for kind of calling on some phrases that Georgia's made popular here this year. And lousy stinking Gators, they've got no things like that to enjoy right now. There is no happy and joy in their world. All they've got is a Netflix documentary dusting off some old highlights of the bygone Urban Meyer era, Georgia living in the present tense. And 67 days from now, the future looks pretty good there as well. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you back tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. A little shorter show today. We were slightly above an hour, but we did like 4 topics, plus an SEC through, plus Connor, and we did it a little shorter than the show was yesterday. So I would say we're going in the right direction in terms of the overall pace of the proceedings. So I feel pretty good about that. Hopefully you enjoyed it too. We'll find out what is on your mind here now, and we'll just see how it's going. So also breaking news during the show as it relates to Julian Lewis. So there you go. Paul Moon talking about Yazeed Haynes, who I think could be an interesting player. You know, it's interesting to hear Kirby Smart talk about Anthony Evans a little earlier. Randy Payne checking in also to say he's ready for the Dog Nation cruise. You love that. Also sending some nice words to me, which I appreciate. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Christy says he's just that guy. Kid is so humble. I don't think she's talking about me, but I'll pretend that she is. Let's see what else. Thomas Tyson says that Yazeed came down south and started torching DBs and camps, and Georgia offered him immediately. I've been a fan of his ever since. So Thomas Tyson sent some good stuff there. Army Dog Charlie also talking about Nolan Smith coming back to be the Georgia coach, something that he said that he wants to do. Let's see what else. Crow King 123 says, I hope that Jake can try to fight for the backup spot. In all honesty, I believe that Jacoby Brissett probably has the number 2 position secure. I believe Brissett did play a decent amount last night. Remember, Sam Howell is going to be the starter there in Washington, and I think they feel like he can have a good year, but Howell's is unproven and as an NFL quarterback can be. So I think that Washington wanted a backup who's got some decent experience being a number 2, which kind of is Brissett. Now, do I think that Jake Fromm could emerge there and maybe at some point in time supplant a guy like Jacoby Brissett? Perhaps that's possible. But in all honesty, for the beginning of the year, it looks like Brissett's likely to be the number 2. But this year there's a roster change, and y'all know I am not like Johnny NFL. Y'all know that I am not, what's his name, Mike Florio. I'm not Florio here. But after the NFC Championship game last year, they changed the roster rule. It used to be that, and I used to go to a bunch of NFL games, so I was kind of aware of this. So on game days, and y'all check me on this, but I believe I'm right about this. On game days, you have 45 of your 53 players active. So you have 45 of the 53 players active. And there was a rule for a while that allowed you to also have a number 3 quarterback that was on the sidelines but not a part of your active 45 that existed for emergency purposes. And the way that worked is once you put the number 3 quarterback in the game, so let's say, starter gets hurt, backup gets hurt, and now you got to go to the third string quarterback. Well, the moment you put the third string quarterback in, your starter and your backup were then ineligible to return to the game. And so that was kind of a rule that was in place that allowed teams to travel 3 quarterbacks for emergency purposes without having to burn one of their 45 active players, which is sort of a made-up arbitrary rule, but nonetheless, I'm sure it's about cost saving for the billionaire owners, but nonetheless, that's the rule that was in place. But then they did away with the rule, and then last year you're talking about a scenario in the NFC Championship game where what's his name with the 49ers gets hurt, and all of a sudden they don't have a quarterback. Well, this year that was embarrassing for the NFL, always going back to solve, last year's problems. Now they've kind of reinstated a version of that third quarterback rule again, which is going to benefit Jake Fromm. So I do believe that Jake has a very good chance of being on the active 53-man roster, which, not to get into his wallet here, but, that's good money. Practice squad money is not bad money, but active roster money is good money. And so, that's kind of the story there. Let us see what else. Kirby's Belt says it's hard for a quarterback in the NFL to get adequate playing time to grow. Yeah, it kind of is. I mean, the NFL is just not really a lot about growth and development. It's just kind of not. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm sure that a lot of quarterbacks who are like, if I could have just gotten my chance to do this or that, then maybe I could have turned it into something. But in Jake's case, remember, he has played some before, so perhaps the experience that he's had, because he started a couple of games with the Giants, that experience that he's had, maybe it makes him more ready for what might come his way in the future. Let's see what else is going on. Jonathan Aaron. I ain't going down that road. Let's see what else. Foster Moss said it'd be nice if Jake Fromm went to the Colts and took Anthony Richardson's job. Yeah, I would certainly like that. So Jay is back from Harris. He says, I was down 250, then up 550. I got a call at 10:30 last night. Okay, so I'm sorry to hear that. So obviously, Jay, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, that Jay, I said he kind of needed a good, fun trip because he's been going through a lot with his mom and the health. And so apparently that's kind of flared back up in a more serious way here. So his trip to Harris and the casino was cut short. But I hope, Jay, you were able to have some fun. And obviously we do continue to pray for you and your mom there, going through a little bit of a health battle right now. So, Jay, I know our entire audience is praying for you there on that. Nature Gator says back in the day, the old Baltimore Colts had to play a third-string quarterback in the NFL playoffs. Tom, is it Matt? Is that how you say it? I believe they won the game. Nature, I also remember when I was a kid, I used to have the VHS cassette of all the Super Bowls, like not the whole game, but like it's like a highlight of Super Bowl I, Super Bowl II, kind of like rolling through the years. I used to watch this VHS cassette all the time. And so like I actually knew a decent amount about the NFL before I was born. My son's kind of like that now. I knew a decent amount about the NFL before I was born just because I was always like watching all these, old VHS cassettes, which if you're young, you're like, what is a VHS cassette? Well, when I was a kid, that's what you did. You popped it in the VCR. But so you're watching this old VHS cassette of these games that took place before I was born, well before I was born in some cases. And Colts started a backup quarterback. I don't know if it's number two. I guess number two. They started, Johnny Unitas was hurt in Super Bowl III. They started Earl Morrall in Super Bowl III. So, yeah. That's back when Jimmy Orr, I think, played for the Colts. That was he went to Georgia. He was a wide receiver, went to Georgia. So like I said, my grandfathers were very big influences on me. And so I always was like into old stuff. I still am. Like if something's 100 years old, you can probably be pretty sure I like it. I've always just been into old stuff, just because my grandfathers were big influences on me. Let's see what else. Good to see Darius Smith in here as always. Hearing some good things about Darius there at camp, and obviously he's sending out some prayers for Jay Shipes, which we really appreciate. Let's see what else. Paul Moon talking about some of the buzz around Brock Vandagriff. I mean, listen, I was led to believe that Vandagriff has had a good summer, and that the performance for Beck that results in him being the starter is not a win by default. That someone like Vandagriff, and perhaps even Gunnar Stockton too, but certainly someone like Vandagriff has worked and performed well enough that Georgia, I think, would feel good about playing him. It just so happens that Carson Beck, I mean, ultimately, as we said yesterday, my understanding of this is, based on people who know more than I do, is that what Kirby Smart said was as factual and honest as possible. That Beck just knows the offense far better. And that Vandagriff, who has the athleticism and has some things like that, it's that command of the offense, that ability to see what's happening on the field. The differentiator for him in a future competition is going to really kind of come down to that, I'm led to believe. Mike Mazzell says, time for us to play a round of golf. Mike, I'd love to do that. I'm not quite sure when the next time I'll pick up some clubs is, but I would certainly love to do that. Jesse Dellinger says that Jalen Carter is an unstoppable force in the new edition of Madden. That's good to know, Jesse. That's good to know. Hopefully my son will get that, and I'll have a chance to play that. I like that. Adrian Eckel says, I am truly sold out and believing the system Kirby's running. He's shown so much growth as a head coach, may go down as the future of one of the best. Adrian, I believe you're right about that we could be in the midst of one of the great coaching performances we've ever seen. And you just see so many examples of the little things that just demonstrate how well all this is working. I believe you're right about that. Brock Purdy, Mitchell Proctor, thank you very much. I was trying to remember Brock Purdy's name earlier. Mitchell, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Let's see what else. Adrian also says that Kirby's going to prove that he was the key part of the Alabama success. I like that. I like that. So Oak Hill Student Worship and Arts Team going to be on the DawgNation cruise. That's awesome to hear, y'all. Thanks a lot. I'm really excited to hear that. We're going to have a very good time. I'm just telling you right now, we would have a very good time. Barry Watkins also says that he would say that I'm humble, which I'm glad to know. I'm glad to know. So, obviously, I'd love nothing more than to be one of these like loud mouths that's sort of telling you how great I am all the time. There's, because I like pro wrestling, right? And so like the sort of pro wrestling style promo, like there are a lot of people in this business that are a lot more comfortable talking about themselves than I am. I'm kind of jealous of that actually, because it must be fun just to go around talking about how great you are all the time. That must be really awesome. That's just never quite worked for me. And I will tell you, and this is just one of those sort of private things, but it is true, is that anytime I have been tempted to get a big ego about something, I have almost always been jerked back to reality by something in my private life very, very fast. And it's one of those things, like I'm in my 40s, and so after you're in your 40s for a little while, you hope you've kind of learned a lesson or two. Like that's kind of the lesson that I've learned. That, you see the guy on the internet, he's just sort of cutting a promo and talking about how cool he is. And, the voice in my head says, not so with you, not so with you. Because anytime I try to kind of get out there and be a little too whatever, anytime I've ever been tempted to do that, it's almost never worked out. Because let me just say this real quick, and then we'll get back to the regular commentary. See, when I was growing up, I'm talking about like a teenager turning into a college student, kind of, coming up. And this is going to sound pretty lame, but it's true. I have always thought that sports talkers were cool. That the idea of having a job where you talk about sports, the old days would be like radio, then it'd be like the ESPN kind of shout fest type shows. I've always thought that sports talkers were cool. And so you can get this sort of misconstrued mindset of, well, if I want to do this job, since I think the people who do the job are cool because it's just my, sort of dream job, then I need to be cool in order to do the job. But there's nothing more uncool than trying to be cool. And so that's where, if you have some humility, hopefully that's where it kind of comes in as, which is, hey, just be careful. Try not to be something that you're not, because that never quite works out. Matt Rukvina says, always remember the wise words of Han Solo. Great kid. Don't get so cocky. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the other thing that I sort of hear in my head every now and then there as well, the words of the very wise Han Solo. Let's go over to DawgNation.com here for a minute. Hunker Down 93 wants to put Bowers at running back for a position for a player too. I like that. I like that a lot. Hey, I think that he could be a pretty good one. Probably Kirby Smart's already kind of said that, at least in a joking way, with Cole Kubelik and Greg McElroy at one point in time in the offseason. But listen, I really do believe Brock Bowers can win the Heisman. I really do. And I know it seems crazy. We haven't had a tight end win the award since 1949, which ironically, the last tight end to win it's also the largest player to win it. 260 pounds. That's the largest Heisman Trophy winner. It was the dude from Notre Dame in 1949. I can't remember his name either. But there's two names I've forgotten during our thing today. But yeah, I mean, I think that Bowers could win the award. And so if you can do a running back thing, he gets plenty of carries as it is, handoff type stuff. Always seems to do well with that. Now, a name that I did remember on the show is Earl Morrall. And what DT says is that Earl Morrall followed Don Shula from Baltimore to Miami. Took over from Bob Greasy when he broke his ankle in Game 5. Greasy came back, AFC Championship game in the second half, and then won the Super Bowl to finish 17-0. There you go, DT. Kind of tying some of this Super Bowl stuff together, which I mentioned Jimmy Orr a little earlier. Now, Orr had the bad moment. That was Jackie Smith that dropped the ball. I guess he was like wide open, and maybe Morrall didn't see him in the end zone. Maybe that's what happened. But that was the Georgia tied of those Baltimore Colts teams. And then the Dolphins of 72 obviously had the great Jake Scott. Randy Hall, I believe it's Leon Hart. That's the tight end. Very good, Randy. Leon Hart was the 1949 Heisman winner and the last tight end to win the award. And Randy, I don't know about asking about a tragedy for a UGA staffer. I don't know the answer to that, Randy. I'm sorry. But I'll try to find out maybe. But if that's the case, we certainly send out prayers for sure. Senior Dog 54 says, I've seen enough of the Braves number 5 starter. Yeah, not a good night for the home team last night. Not a good night. I guess even the, Mets have to have a decent game every now and then. Not a good night for the home team. Kind of battled back a little bit, but when you get to the postseason, as Senior Dog said, you're not going to be running a 5-man rotation at that point in time, and you're going to probably get Kyle Wright back come September. You get Jesse Chavez back in the bullpen. I think the Braves still have as good a shot as anyone to win the World Series, but this is not a guarantee. It's not. This team's going to have to swing the bat in the postseason as they've swung it for most of the regular season to have a shot. Now, you're not scoring 9 runs in a lot of postseason games. I get that. But you're going to have to put pressure on the opposition with what you can do with the bats. Drum Dog, College Football Final was the name of the show with Lou Holtz. And like I said, I have great nostalgic memories of that show. As dumb as those takes were, like they're just hideous, horrendous takes. As dumb as the takes were, still enjoyed it. And I look back on it with very fond memories. Scott Harris says, Week 1, Florida, Utah, UNC, South Carolina, LSU, Florida State. Start 1, bench 1, cut 1. So I'm going to cut Florida, Utah. Now, I'm excited about it, but you're going to force me to here. I'm going to cut Florida, Utah because I don't think Florida can keep pace. I think North Carolina, South Carolina is a really good game. I do. I think North Carolina, South Carolina is a really good game. Tar Heels a little bit of a small favorite there. That's a game I think South Carolina could win. I am far higher on South Carolina than the market is, so to speak. But I like Gamecocks there in that spot in Charlotte. All right, we're going to do like one final trip around the comment section, then we're going to be gone. Army Dog Charlie says, Lou Holtz is quite funny when you meet him. He ate chow with us in Kuwait, asked him to sit at our table. That's awesome, Charlie. That's really cool to hear. And I've been at an event where he does these speaking events, and there's like one magic trick thing he always does. When he does these things, perhaps he even did it for you there because he does this magic trick everywhere he goes, apparently. But the point is that, you can make fun of Holtz for some of the TV stuff, but he comes across as a pretty genuine guy. Like, he comes across as somebody who really does sort of believe, I don't know, whatever. He seems to be into trying to do right by people, I guess is what I'm saying. So I think I probably like Lou Holtz. I probably do. Maybe. Foster Moss asks a good question. Are we going to do go with the flow for week 0? I'll probably make some picks, but I don't think we're officially starting to go with the flow until we typically do go with the flow around Georgia games. Now we'll do go with the flow during an off week. Should we have done a go with the flow for a week 0? Maybe we should have, but we're going to start that for the first Georgia game. But I'll give some picks here this week. I will do that. But thank you for asking. Thomas Tyson gives you a fire Bobo, and in case you're wondering if that was sarcastic or not, also gives you a fire Kirby right after that. Which is very funny. Let's see what else. Army Dog Charlie says you would like him be a Lou Holtz. Yeah, I think I probably would, Charlie. I'm glad you said that. Appreciate that. And as always, thank you for your service to our country, of course. All right, I'm going to go back to Facebook. We're going to get ready to go after this. Brandon Griffin says Ladd McConkey's going to have a monster season. I think that could very well be true. Winfred Steinspring says that he doesn't think a tight end can win the award. He says it's quarterback, running backs, plus politics. Here's the thing to understand, though, is the so-called like Heisman politics have softened it up here a little bit. In fact, go back to 2020. Devontae Smith won the Heisman Trophy. Now, I know 2020 was a weird year because it's pandemic. Everything about college football was strange that year. But that would have also seemed impossible at one point in time, too. And you may say, well, wide receiver is still different than tight end. But the point is that at this point in time, Brock Bowers may be kind of a tight end in sort of name only a little bit. You know, because Georgia, I think, is functionally going to use him as if he is a wide receiver. And I also believe this. At a certain point, the thing that makes Bowers weird, that he's a potential Heisman candidate who's also a tight end, that weirdness could work in his favor as much as it works against him, because there could be this desire to get behind that of, you know, he allows him to stand out from the crowd a bit. We also had a defensive player become a Heisman finalist 2 years ago. Now, that was the wrong one. It should have been Jordan Davis. It was Aiden Hutchinson, another example of Michigan being completely overinflated. But nonetheless, it was a non-traditional Heisman finalist. You know, I had a guy like Stetson Bennett become a Heisman finalist last year. Now, based on performance, perhaps that's, you know, something that should have been done. But there are a lot of people who believed that he just wouldn't do it. In fact, there were a lot of people that said some horrible things about Bennett, about being a Heisman finalist. But Bennett kind of, perhaps he walked so Bowers can run. Like, obviously I'm a pro-Georgia guy, and there's a lot to be, you know, positive about with Georgia, but I also try not to lie to you. Like, I wouldn't say this if I didn't genuinely believe it's possible, and I wouldn't say it if I couldn't support it with some evidence. Wide receiver won it a couple of years ago. Defensive player was a finalist a couple of years ago. Georgia had a finalist last year. I think all of that sets the stage that if it is big numbers, 1,000-plus yards, double-digit touchdowns, if it is big numbers, best player on the best team could be a recipe for Bowers winning it. I do genuinely believe that's true. And we'll leave our conversation there here today. Glad to have you. Make sure you check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. It's crazy hot right now. So go ahead and get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs to make sure you stay as cool as possible during the long, hot summer season that is not quite over with yet. So rsandrews.com for more on that. And as one of our commenters mentioned, Go With The Flow, presented by RS Andrews, returns next week in the lead up to the first Georgia game. So we'll see you then for that, and back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia,